Welcome, everyone. We'll give you a moment to get settled, and then we're going to jump right in and get started. Do you see my screen okay?
Mhm.
Great. Oh. Everybody ready to get started?
Ready?
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to session one of our four-part series of Thriving Together from Silos to Synergy in Collaborative Partnerships. My name is Janelle Mercado, and I am the project coordinator for the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. And I'm joined today with my co-presenter, our fabulous director, Kevin. Want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Schaefer, the director of the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, and so glad to be here. And I look forward to all of the content we're about to share.
Thanks, Kevin. On behalf of our team, we would like to start by thanking the California Department of Education for funding our project and all of the work that we do. We would also like to thank our respective county offices, El Dorado County Office of Education and Riverside County Office of Education. We do have a number of our teammates here today who are going to be supporting all of you in the chat. So hello, everybody from the team. Thanks for being here today. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with our project, we're a technical assistance project, and you can find any of the work that we're doing on our website at sipinclusion.org or on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at SIP Inclusion. So please follow us for more information about all of the work that we are doing statewide, and of course, our no-cost professional learning and resources. I want everybody to know that our session materials are going to be housed on a resource Padlet, as well as a home-based document, which is going to be dropped in the chat right now. You can use the QR code or you can use the link that's being dropped in the chat for access to all of the materials and resources, including the slide presentation. After today's session, because we are recording, so after today's session, we will house the recording on the resource Padlet. Just give us about a week because we want to make sure that we have the highest level of accessibility, and closed captioning will be included in that recording. If you are in need of a certificate of completion for today's session, you can find that also on the resource Padlet. So just download that and submit it to whomever might need it within your district or your organization. So with that, we also have enabled closed captioning, and we do have an ASL interpreter with us today. Thank you for being here. So please make sure that you are accessing closed captioning and ASL interpretation to ensure you have the highest level of access. So with that, we are going to jump in.
Judy,
my first question to all of you is, how many of you are familiar with Judy Heumann? So let's use the chat to engage with one another today. Again, we have folks on our team who are supporting in the chat if you have any questions, but I am just curious, how many of you are familiar with Judy Heumann? So we have some people saying love her, know her, not familiar. So Judy Heumann is known as the mother of the disability rights movement. In the 70s, she led the 504 sit-ins, and we really owe so much of the progress in where we are today to the work that she led and initiated in the early 70s. The Supporting Inclusive Practices Project was incredibly fortunate to work with her as one of our keynote presenters at our very first annual SIP Inclusion Conference. And so we've taken a little snippet from her presentation that we want to really ground all of us in the space that we're in today as we're talking about designing inclusive systems from leadership all the way to the classroom level, one of the questions we asked Judy Heumann is, what is your picture of a fully inclusive school and what will it take to realize this vision? So let's listen to what she had to say.
Your picture of a fully inclusive school and what will it take to realize this vision?
For me, a fully inclusive school is one where the leadership from the top down believes that inclusion works. I've also seen in a number of schools that I visited where when the principal had a good background in special ed in a regular school, that also positively impacted the school overall because the principals were problem solvers. I'm not saying that principals who don't have a special ed background can't do the same, but it's just been noticeable for me when I was visiting schools to see that. So leadership and knowledge is very important. And respect and inclusion of parents and training of teachers. And obviously resources are important. And being able to not use quote unquote lack of resources as an excuse to put kids in segregated classes where we know they're not going to succeed. So
that's just a snippet of Judy Heumann. And we ask the question all the time in working with leadership teams, in working with educators through professional development. We ask the question all the time, who knows who Judy Heumann is? And being the queen of all things disability rights, it's important as a starting point for us to evaluate our curriculum and our history and whether or not we position disability history from a place of honor and respect and the importance for students with disabilities to see the history of disability from an asset-based perspective and review our curriculum as well as the books that line our libraries, our classroom libraries, as well as our school site libraries, and whether or not we have books that are written by disabled authors or they position disability from an asset-based perspective. And much of our work is to assist LEAs in seeing the systemic injustices that are invisible by making them visible through their regularities in practice. And we continue doing the same thing because we don't recognize that we could, with the best of intent, be actually causing harm post-secondary. So focusing on our impact as well as our intent and creating alignment. So one of the quotes that we love is this idea of systemic injustice are made invisible through their regularities in practice. Because we've always done it this way, we continue doing it that way. So assessing and bringing visible systemic injustice and then determining what changes need to happen to ensure meaningful inclusion beyond LRE is being provided to students with disabilities. So we've learned a few things in our work over the last 10 years with the SIP project. One of them is clarity of vision is a must. Inclusion is a term that is overused, and it's used to describe a broad continuum of perspectives around placement and the sense of belonging, relationship, and community that students experience or they don't experience. So across a continuum, we have to reassess when we use the term inclusion, are we actually referring to understanding the rightful presence that students have in all educational environments or spaces? And do we design from a perspective of ensuring representation and needs and access are at the forefront of the work that we do so that students aren't just in a place, but they're in a place that's rooted in community, relationship, and belonging? Or are we asking students to assimilate into an environment that is created within a box And in the assimilation process, we're also asking them to deny a part of their identity that is critical to the diversity in each of those settings. So when we talk about inclusion, we have to be very clear on how we define it and how we create a vision in order to move in that direction. We've also learned that it requires a system-wide effort to ensure we're moving in that direction that we've defined through an inclusion. And that does not mean that all inclusion efforts fall as the responsibility of the special education department, special education administrators, special education teachers, etc. So we have to think about who's at the table. What is the role and the responsibility of HR? What is the role of responsibility of facilities, transportation, business, curriculum, special education, communications? At the site level, at the district level, at the classroom level, bringing in the perspective of the family and the community is critical. We've also learned that disability equity work cannot remain exclusively in the special education realm. So if your organization has a DEI effort, diversity, inclusion, equity, many times that initiative does not include students with disabilities or address allyship around ableism. So we have to have that collective responsibility that special education has a place doesn't necessarily mean that equity work around all students, including students with disabilities, is only in the realm of special ed. Something else we've learned is that inclusion and least restrictive environment determination are not synonymous. In the IEP process, we're determining least restrictive environment, and the least restrictive environment, which could be general education, may not result or be designed in such a way that students experience meaningful inclusion. So separating this idea out that least restrictive environment and inclusion are not synonymous, but that is exactly what we're working toward. We have to recognize and interrupt ableism. The other question that we get asked all the time, what is ableism? We had never heard of it. So we have to bring ableism to the forefront in order to address it from an allyship perspective. And then finally, creating meaningful, inclusive environments. It has to be proactive and planful. It's a social justice whole systems approach. And just as we started with Judy Heumann, we have to center the voice and the perspective of disabled individuals and family. We have to ask for their input to effectively design environments that are reflective of their needs. And we can't do that if we're making assumptions around what their needs are from a place of not understanding the experiences and the needs of identities we may not possess. So that was a lot, but we do want to bring Judy right back to the fore because this quote is particularly meaningful as a starting point. And many of our districts will, and you'll hear later from Santa Barbara and Orcutt, do we elicit that voice, whether it be through surveys or through empathy interviews, in such a way that we can use that qualitative data to inform our decision making as we move toward meaningful inclusion? So Judy says we have the right, we have to have the ability to make decisions about ourselves, to not be led by others, but to truly have our voices heard, which requires a sense of humility from educators and administrators who are seen as the experts. And that's where the humility has to come in. So we have quick activity. There is a link that'll go into the chat. It is to a Padlet with about 12 quotes. And we'd like you to click on the link, go to the Padlet, and you'll see the quotes. You can click on the quote to actually bring it full screen. And then you can hit the back arrow. And then we'd like you to either leave your connection, any questions, anything that surfaces for you. You can leave it under the quote. You don't have to press the plus sign under the quote. Just start typing what your connection is. Or you can come back into the chat and you can leave your responses here. So this is our way to bring in the voice and the perspective of the disability community, as well as experts in the disability studies realm. Okay, so we'll give you, we'll start with a good 5 minutes. You won't get to all of them. But go ahead and click on the quote and we'll bring you back when we're ready. All right, we're gonna come back. I see that there are some quotes that are being put into the chat. If you have a particularly um, an interest in one of the quotes or would like to share it, please put it in the chat. We'll go back to the Padlet as a team later and just look at your comments. They're always very enlightening. So any comments, any questions, any connections that you'd like to put in the chat from that activity? Typically, when we do professional development, we always bring the voice of the disability community into our presentations, either through co-presenting or videos or the quotes that you see on the Padlet. And then we do a gallery tour of each of the quotes and just have a self-reflection on any new learnings. Because as generally non-disabled individuals, we are constantly having to seek out to educate ourselves as allies. So would love to continue seeing those comments in the quote or in the chat. Next slide. So as we work with educational organizations, we are framing that work around the results pyramid. So we've instituted inclusion academies this past year, and it's to bring county offices and SELPAs together to build capacity to support students with disabilities at the LEA level. So bringing in LEA leadership teams and working with the county and the SELPA creates that alignment within the region. And the results pyramid, through an organization that we work with called Culture Partners, it actually frames out the work that we do in creating an implementation plan. So as we go through, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the results pyramid is and how we work through it to create change around inclusion. So you'll see at the top of the pyramid, results. We're all looking for improved results. We're looking for desired results. But the problem is that in the next section of the pyramid, we have actions. And we tend to put all of our focus on the actions and the activities. And if you look at your strategic plan, you look at your LCAP, you look at your SIM plan, there's a lot of things that you're doing. There's a lot of activities that in many cases create initiative overload at the teacher and the administration level. What the trap is that districts fall into is that that's where they end with the actions, and then they hope for an improvement in their results. What they don't focus on deeply enough is what is the belief system of our organization around disability? And are there any ableist mindsets? Do we use ableist language? What are the ableist behaviors that we may not recognize because of the regularity in the systemic injustice of ableism? And then at the very bottom, what are the experiences that our educators have that influence their beliefs of what students with disabilities can and can't do? And how does that then influence the action that connects to results? And whether it's positive or negative results, it's all based on the actions influenced by the beliefs that are impacted by the experiences. And you'll see that cut through right at the actions. That's the trap that organizations fall into, in that it's called the actions trap. And that we focus on the thing without focusing on the culture, which is the next visual. Our culture is the way we think and the way that we act, and it's based in our experiences. If an educator has a negative experience around inclusion, that will inform their beliefs that inclusion doesn't work. That will then influence their behavior, their language, their decision making, that will then impact the results positively or negatively. So we start our inclusion academies with what are the results? What does the data show? What data do we have available? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? And then we skip down to what are the beliefs? What are the experiences we need to create? And then we move to what actions we need to put in place to improve our structures, our policies, and our practices around inclusion. So I hope everyone sees that through line of experiences, shape beliefs, impact actions, and then determine results. Okay? And we have to have a culture of accountability for ourselves and accountability for everyone in our system. And we all take accountability because we have a very clear vision of what inclusion means, how we define it, and our role in pushing that forward. So this is also where allyship comes into play, is that we are accountable for holding ourselves to a level of respect and value and honor of our students with disabilities, and how we also hold others accountable for ensuring language, behaviors, communication, decisions are all within a realm of that honor and the respect and the value. And who's having these conversations? Inclusion efforts cannot, and I'll repeat, cannot fall on the shoulders of teachers. And we will implement UDL. We'll do professional development for teachers. And that rarely creates the systemic change, the sustainability, the scaling of an initiative to actually be effective across all environments. We will have pockets of excellence, but we are not going to ensure that all students, specifically for the content of today, students with disabilities across our entire organization experience that level of meaningful inclusion, because we leave it up to the perspective, the experiences and the beliefs and the actions of our educators. So how do we at a district level, at a county level, at a SELPA level, create that alignment of support so that we're all moving in the same direction? Otherwise, we're creating confusion within the system. So we have to have LEA district administrators, all departments, special education administrators, data specialists, school site administrators, teacher leaders, some cases families, related service staff. Who needs to be part of the conversation because they hold a piece and a perspective of the system that without it, we cannot create those meaningful inclusive environments system-wide. So one last bit. So we have R1, which are our current results. We looked at the data. Here's where we currently are. And then we have our actions, our behaviors, and our experiences that are in current situations. And those three levels make up our culture. So we have our current culture, and what organizations expect is the desired results on top of an old culture. And it rarely improves results for students with disabilities, either in our compliance, 80% or more in general education, or if we're defining inclusion as meaningful relationship, community, belonging, students won't have that experience in their least restrictive environment with ultimate access to their typically developing peers if we don't address the culture. So what we're looking at is creating that R2, understanding what the R2 is in terms of desired results, and then looking at the culture that needs to be in place to ensure student level experiences are calibrated across the entire system. So that culture piece on the next click is where we start, starting with behaviors, our beliefs, starting with experiences, then moving to actions to reach the desired results. So in the chat, does that make sense that we don't start with the actions or the activities? We start with the belief system and the experiences that we need to provide to influence those actions to move to the results. Thank you, Sarah. Consuelo, it's connecting. It's a different way of looking at implementation planning. Awesome. I see a lot of yeses.
Awesome. Well,
Okay.
hopefully this next section will help further the clarity, because we want to give you some examples of the work that we're doing with many of the districts that we're supporting in county offices and SELPAs to improve their systems. Notice we started this webinar series talking about systems, and like Kevin said, we cannot put this on the backs of teachers. So our efforts start at the highest level of leadership. Our goals are to break down those silos across general and special education at the district level to begin building a system that supports all educators. So what does it look like to identify our key results? One of the first questions we ask is, what are our current results related to least restrictive environment compliance and or inclusion? And then we ask, okay, based on what we're seeing now, whatever our data is telling us, what are the desired results? Where do we want to go as it relates to inclusion, rightful presence for students with disabilities? When we are asking folks to identify these desired results, we want them to think in terms of what are results that are meaningful, memorable, measurable, align to other district priorities so that we're not doing too many things and we can focus on just the right priorities within our district. So we're looking at a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. Here's a few samples. So we might have, maybe our starting point is to just focus on least restrictive environment. So maybe it's something like a 3.5 increase in least restrictive environment. Well, if we have students in the least restrictive environment and we're still not seeing the outcomes that we desire, another question to ask is, how are teachers feeling about their confidence or ability to support students with disabilities in an inclusive classroom? So maybe we do something like a survey that gives us an idea of the percentage of teachers, 95% of teachers, we want them to feel confident to support students with disabilities. And if we have now that confidence level, we have students in the classroom and we're still not seeing those desired results, maybe we want to specifically focus beyond compliance, looking at meaningful inclusion. What % of students report feeling a strong sense of belonging, connection to the school community, including both peers and adults? So an example that we might ask or that we might see when unpacking this results pyramid, you may see a current results, something listed like educator self-efficacy. Only 70% of teachers feel confident to support students with disabilities in an inclusive classroom. Well, that's not enough. That's not good enough. So maybe we'll focus on self-efficacy as our desired results, which is our R2, which means we want to see 95% of teachers feeling confident to support students with disabilities in an inclusive classroom. And notice that from here, we're going to skip actions. Why? Because we don't want to just step into solutionitis. We don't want to just step into those actions. We really want to dig in to what are our core beliefs that are holding up those desired results. So the next stage is to look at our beliefs, and we start asking questions about what are those core beliefs as educators in our system that we are holding. What are the beliefs that are getting in the way of the desired results related to inclusion? Once we have identified the current beliefs, that's our B1, then we want to start thinking about the desired beliefs or the beliefs that we want educators to hold in order to achieve those desired results. So when we're talking about beliefs, we're looking at unpacking awareness or lack of awareness regarding disability and disability advocacy, or regarding implicit bias about disability, confirmation bias, and ableism that exists in our system. We have to remember that our systems unintentionally were designed through ableism. We really want to get to the root of that and address the mindsets towards disability. A starting place is to acknowledge that this work has to start from the very beginning of a student's educational experience. What Dr. Eric Carter tells us in this quote that we hold on to very soundly in the work that we do is, early segregation does not merely predict later segregation, it almost ensures it. The trajectory we establish in schools is quite likely to continue after graduation. We must establish a trajectory of full and meaningful participation when it comes to transition preparation. Location matters. And we know this, once a student starts in a secluded setting from the very beginning, it is really, really difficult to come back into a more inclusive environment. And the reality is our systems are growing and they're changing and they are becoming more inclusive. So I'm not sure if you all are aware that we now have college programs for students with developmental disabilities across the country. And we have a number of them here in California. The governor passed a bill in this past year that is urging college programs to create more opportunities for individuals with disabilities. We, in California, one that is a 4-year independent living program. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the UC Davis Redwood Seed Scholar Mentor Program. It's an exemplary program to show what the possibilities are for individuals with even the most extensive support needs. So we know that the focus is on early ed, and we now have programs in secondary and beyond in college. So our work has to happen throughout the system. We also, in California, have just launched LA County Office of Ed and Sacramento County Office of Ed are the newest grant recipients of a California Center for Inclusive Colleges, CCIC. So more information to come once they get their boots off the ground and running in this work, but there will be additional support in helping us within the system get connected to these college programs. So as Kevin mentioned, and we've mentioned, when we're addressing the mindsets about inclusion, we start with ableism. If ableism is grounded in that discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that a typical ability is superior compared to a disability. And so once we start to address the ableism in our system, we can address what continues to be this perpetuating cycle of students with disabilities who continue to be marginalized. So we refer to the soft bigotry of low expectations as a definition for this cycle, which starts with the deficit view of a student with disability who is maybe referred to or seen as not being able to or capable of. And that is not true. We know that that is not true. Once that deficit view is in place, what then happens unintentionally is we lower the expectations. We label or place a student in a remedial, potentially excluded program, which then perpetuates this cycle of school failure and the student with the disability experiencing that marginalization within our system. So a question to consider when we're thinking about rebuilding our systems or improving our systems is, where does the soft bigotry of low expectation exist within your organization? What are some examples that you have either seen, observed, experienced yourself of the soft bigotry of low expectation? I'll give a second for everybody who is interested in participating in the chat to just drop a comment in the chat.
Janelle, we put in the chat also from Think College. You can do a search and you can look up all of the available college programs, 2-year programs, 4-year programs, residential, commuter. Really great resource at Think College.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good way to see the work that's happening at a national level. So we see some examples coming in where we notice a complete or incomplete scores without feedback, not enough experience and exposure to curriculum. I love this comment because too often we're talking about, in education systems, we're talking about achievement gaps. The question is, are we looking at opportunity gaps as much as we're looking at achievement gaps? Because if a student doesn't have the opportunity, are we going to see them achieve? So with that, one of our first steps to addressing ableism is through allyship. And that is taking the privilege and the power that we all carry to work in solidarity and in partnership with individuals with disabilities. So a lot of times you'll hear us within the SIP project, we are working alongside, or we will work to lift up the voices of the disability community. We started today's presentation by asking you to ground yourself in the voice of the disability community. And that is because we have to be able to work with and alongside in order to continue moving this work forward. So we also start with the presumption of competence. If ever we are in doubt or we are not sure what a student can learn, we presume competence and the ability to learn. So how this may look when we go back to the results pyramid and we start to align addressing those core beliefs in alignment with our desired results. So we are focusing specifically on improving educator efficacy and confidence to support students with disabilities. Perhaps a core belief is there are silos across general and special education within our system. And as a result of those silos, teachers don't feel that they are able to support students with disabilities. So if we identify that as a current belief that we want to improve to get to our desired result, which is improving that self-efficacy, then we need to create a core belief that we all agree together we can, where we have general and special educators, not just teachers. Notice it says educators, and that's from the district level to the classroom level. We have general and special educators who believe it is their responsibility, that they have collective ownership and responsibility to work together in support of all students. So now we've talked about beliefs. We're going to experiences. A question we ask when we're asking folks to think about current experiences: what inclusion related experiences are staff currently having or encountering that support the beliefs that they hold? And then once we identify those current experiences, we want to look at what new experiences need to be created in order to change those core beliefs. So the way Culture Partners outlines experiences is they say, listen, there's some that are meaningful, immediately impactful type 1 experiences. They're clearly understood. No interpretation is needed. The moment you have that experience, it will change you. It will change your mindset. It will change your practices. There's also a type 2 experience that might not be as impactful, but still very impactful, and may need a little interpretation to form those desired beliefs. A type 3 experience is less significant, more interpretation is needed, and may not even impact the desired beliefs. And then there's those type 4 experiences that are always misinterpreted and can in fact create harm. And when we started this presentation today, Kevin mentioned, in many cases, folks have experienced inclusion that was not intentional, that was not planned, that was not supported. And then guess what happens? What happens to their beliefs about inclusion? They don't believe it works. They don't believe it's possible. They don't feel good about it. They don't feel that they are capable of supporting students in an inclusive environment. And so it's very important as we're rolling out this work that we are doing it intentionally. And again, from the system level. So I'm going to skip these examples and go to our example of connecting again and aligning again to our desired results of improving teacher or educator self-efficacy, What is an experience we want to start to create? Well, let's start by creating, say we don't have good experiences for teachers. Maybe currently general education teachers and specialists, they don't even have opportunities to get to know each other, to plan together, to teach together, or even interact with one another. So a new experience we would want to focus on is general education teachers and specialists working together, building relationships together so that they can experience what it's like to support all students together. So maybe they're provided some co-planning instructional opportunities. The last step then, after we address the culture, is focusing on action. So first action that we need to look at what is happening within our system, what initiatives or practices or policies that we have to put a stop to in order to start new actions, new policies, procedures that will help us achieve our desired results. So within the Supporting Inclusive Practices project, we use the Blueprint for Inclusion. This is a system change framework that requires time. It requires starting with envisioning and taking steps in the right direction as a system. So we go from envisioning to building, implementing, scaling, then sustaining. We do not just dive in to implementing. We take these steps so that we are creating the system that supports the teachers. So throughout the rest of this series, we are going to introduce a number of other practices or actions that relate to collaboration, shared leadership, and partnership. Throughout the series, we're going to introduce why it's so important that we start with an inclusive leadership and school site team. Kevin mentioned earlier in the presentation, the importance of developing a team across your system, breaking down those silos. Next in the presentation, we'll learn from a county office, SELPA, and district who have done this beautifully. The next step is creating a shared vision. In session 2, we will review master scheduling. And session 3, we'll talk about inclusive instructional models and different ways to bring educators together and collaborate in support of all students. And then lastly, we will, in session 4, talk about inclusive instructional practices that get to those desired results. So our last example here, potential actions that we want to stop are general education teachers and specialists not having designated co-planning and instructional time within their schedule. Instead, we want to build out a master schedule that supports co-planning and instructional time for both general and special education specialists to work together in support of all students. So I went really fast. I want to make sure we don't have any questions in the chat before I kick it over. Unfortunately, because of time, I want to make sure we have enough time for our guest presenters. I'm going to skip this small video and instead ask you all to do a quick reflection. We just talked about a lot of information. What is one action that you can start tomorrow to advance inclusion within your system? Lunch activities for all, great place to start. Share back to leadership on possible steps to get teachers on board. Yes, again, this presentation is recorded and we will post it on the Padlet. So if there are any of your team members that you would like to invite in to watch this presentation and have some discussions together, we would absolutely encourage that. Continue to build bridges between the silos and communicate ways to best collaborate for everyone. Awesome. Kevin, are there any that you want to point out that you're seeing?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is having inclusion conversations at the site level. And I would also add having inclusion conversations and decision making around policy, practice, and culture at the district level that is in alignment with that site level definition of inclusion, and listening to the sites, the administrators and the teachers at sites of what their priorities are, what their needs are, and then that feedback loop back up to the district to inform the district on what's needed.
You see that horizontal and vertical alignment is essential.
We're
So
gonna save all these so that we can have the whole toolkit.
gonna say keep them coming because I want to really use this to share with others. And with that, we want to make sure our guest presenters have the amount of time that they need to present. So Kevin, I'm going to kick it over to you to do some introductions.
Awesome. I'm not going to do the exact introductions. I'm going to let our team introduce themselves. But one of the questions that we get asked all the time is, show me inclusion. who's doing inclusion? Who can we connect with? Who's in the process of doing inclusion? So I have the honor to introduce the teams from Santa Barbara County Office of Education, Santa Barbara SELPA, and Orcutt Union School District. And they've been doing the work for a number of years, and the work expands. And the thing I love most is they keep learning. They keep looking at the data, they look at the experiences, and they use that to move forward to support across all levels of the organization to specifically support students with disabilities all the way down to the classroom level. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Ellen for her introduction, and then Ellen, you can kick it over to whoever you choose, but we're gonna let you tell your story.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Barger, Associate Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction at Santa Barbara County Education Office. And I'm actually going to turn it to Rachel, and then I'll come back in. And so, Rachel, you'll begin for us.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. You can see our presenters on the screen today, and I think we'll just introduce ourselves as we have the opportunity to speak to you. I want to just first start by, on behalf of our county team and our SELPA and district partners, just thanking SIP, our SIP partners, for the opportunity to present today and share a little bit about our story. And what I'm going to really speak about is something that we've been working on developing over the last handful of years, that is now in year 2, which is our inclusion network, our Santa Barbara County Inclusion Network. And what I think that you'll hear as we share our story is a lot of connection. You'll see some things, just directly from the presentation you just saw, that we are using as kind of anchors in the work. But I think you'll also hear a lot of connections around some of the themes. And this idea of silos to synergy really matches well with where this team started and what our vision is for the network and the other work that we're doing around inclusion in our county. So starting on the next slide with really what our vision is for our inclusion network. And I'll let you kind of read through that as I speak, but this is really what's guiding the work. What I'll say also is that we didn't start with this. I'm going to take you through in just a minute kind of how we got to this point. But it took some work and it took some partnership and a lot of deep thinking and reflection for us to get to this place of we want to create an opportunity for districts in our county to come together and really spend the time digging into their current systems, their policies, practices, and cultures, and have the time and space to really reflect and develop ideas about how they want to move inclusive practices, inclusion forward for the students in their systems. So to get an idea of, what Santa Barbara County, who we are as Santa Barbara as a county, this next slide gives just a kind of overview of some of our demographics. So some things to know about Santa Barbara County is we have about almost 67,000 students in the county. We have 20 districts, 15 charters. And what's interesting about our districts is that about 50% are community funded or basic aid. And we have a wide variety of sizes. So our largest district is a K-8. They have nearly 18,000 kids. We also have a K-8 that has about 30 kids. So we've got this, wide range of districts that we're attempting to serve. Some things about our students with disabilities, if you look at the bottom box, a little bit of statistics about students with disabilities. And while our chronic absenteeism and suspension for students with disabilities has improved over the last couple of years, both of those are still landing at about twice the rate as those for students with no disability. So you'll see in just a minute, there were there have been some things that sort of led us to start having some conversations about what the experiences of students with disabilities were like for those students within Santa Barbara County. So on the next slide, I want to take you through kind of our origin story. And I think what's important to know is that this work started for us way back in 2017. And while we had seen some outcomes for students with disabilities, across the county as, kind of not measuring up, we had the dashboard had been released. And so we could really see some concrete evidence of that. And then we had this sort of tipping point where our teachers, our special ed teachers in our induction program, were really talking about this disconnect between what they were being taught in their teacher prep programs and what the reality of experiences were in the schools and districts where they had where they were working. And so we just initiated a conversation with our Santa Barbara County SELPA partners and just started talking about what this might look like if we were to tackle this. And we knew that we didn't know enough to just jump right in with some solutions. And so we started with this idea of inquiry and inquiry leading to action. And so we partnered with some community members. We had some disability voices, some individuals with disabilities come in and speak to our group. And we were we had some great momentum, and then we landed in, of course, 2020 with the pandemic. So we took a pause at that point. And then really in 2022 and 23, we came back together with our Santa Barbara County SELPA partners and started having this conversation again. And we said, we're really ready to move from inquiry into some form of action. And I'm going to let Dr. Ray Avila, our Executive Director of our Santa Barbara County SELPA, talk about how we connected with SIP and Kevin.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here today. So here we are in 2023, and we're wanting to get that momentum going again. And I'm sitting at a monthly state SELPA meeting, and lo and behold, Kevin Schaefer is presenting to our audience. And he's definitely talking about all the great work that SIP and his colleagues were doing. Of course, a focus on inclusion, and just a light bulb went off in my head. And I thought, okay, here it is. This is the golden ticket. I'm going to take it back to Santa Barbara County, talk to my colleagues at the county office, and it was very well received. And so we made a connection with Kevin. He was very happy to join the work that we were doing and moving forward with this. And so we're very appreciative of Kevin, of SIP, of Janelle and the team, and all that they've brought to our county. And we work together well as a county office and as a SELPA group for all of our LEAs in Santa Barbara County.
Thanks, Ray. And so with SIP's help and partnership, we made it through our first year of Inclusion Network, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what that included and some of our learnings from that. This year we're in year 2, and the outcomes from year 1 pointed to our participants really having an appetite for UDL learning, implementation, everything UDL. And so when we as a team kind of got together, we said, how do we want to approach this? And Kevin pointed us to Open Access as another partner. So this year we've brought Open Access into the network, and they are helping us move through our days with the network this year, really approaching UDL from as an equity-based whole system transformation. So, Kevin mentioned not building inclusion on the backs of teachers. We also can't build UDL on the backs of teachers. This really has to be a system-wide approach. So we're taking our learnings from that first year of how we were looking at using the triangle, the pyramid, and really thinking about how do we then apply some of that same learning when we're talking about UDL implementation. So on these next handful of slides, we're highlighting just some of our key sort of elements and takeaways from developing this network. And to start off this first portion, talking about recruitment, we're going to bring Ellen Barger back.
Thanks. And thanks for that overview, because the question we often get is, how did you get folks to focus on this? And what I will say is that we have been trying to model this, to model the partnerships, to model the leadership since we started back in 2017, 2018. So one of the things about leadership, and we've been talking about it throughout this webinar, is how much leadership matters. And for leaders, it's our vision, it's our behaviors, our language, and most importantly, where we place our resources, our time, our energy, and our attention. And the accountability is really in all of those. And so as we think about systemic injustices, that is the job of the leader. And so when we began, the question is about recruitment. And so within our recruitment, not only were we modeling this, was I modeling this through our curriculum council, which is where we bring all of our instructional leaders together to say, you are the leader for all students. 1 in 8, 1 in 7 of your students has a disability. And so therefore, if you are a leader, you're a leader for every student, and you're a leader of your systems. And so in our curriculum council, we really had centered the outcomes, these inequitable outcomes and injustices. And so, you know, through data, through discussion, through giving it our time and attention. But then we took it a step further that we think really made the difference. And that was with the support of our county superintendent of schools. And so, you know, you've heard references to the great relationship we have between the Santa Barbara County Education Office and our SELPA. And one thing I want to say, we're very, very lucky to have an amazing SELPA. And a SELPA is not in our county office, but sometimes it feels like it because we work so closely together. So our superintendent, our county superintendent of schools, Dr. Susan Salcido, saw this incredible work that we were doing, and she thought it was essential to bring this to her superintendent's council. And so she invited Ray and me to come and present together to say, if we make a collective commitment among all of our districts and our charters, what is the collective impact that we can have? Because these systemic injustices are so widespread, not in just your district and not just in our county, but across the state. And so imagining what we could do together. And so we were very intentional in that. Also, as you kind of heard talked about, part of leadership is not assigning things to other people. It's to clearly provide that vision, that coherence, but it's also a sense of humility and knowing that you can't do everything yourself. Greatness is in the agency of others. And by combining that positional authority, access to all of the resources, the leadership vision, along with our fantastic partners within SIP and Open Access and SIL at all the different places, we just knew that we could do this together. And so, Rachel, do you want to say a little bit more, and Ray, about our partnerships with our recruitment?
Yeah, I think that, the other thing that we did in terms of recruiting was really use some of our, sort of personal capital in reaching out to individuals directly and emphasizing that the importance of someone with decisional capital being a part of the team. We also really emphasized that this was for teams, you know, a solo practitioner showing up really wasn't the intention of the work. And I would say we got a really great response, particularly after sort of our first meeting. And in that first year, by the end of the year, we had other districts sort of wanting to be a part of the process.
Agreed. And it's just all about being available for our district leaders to let them inquire and answer questions that they might have in the steps in moving forward. Both Rachel and I and our colleagues had the ability to do that over a period of time, and that really helped with recruitment and just reassuring them that we were all going to work together for the good of the cause. And that included some deep conversations with superintendents and their cabinet level leaders, which was great because that support was needed.
Yeah, so you know, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the recruitment piece because it is just so important to have the right people in the room when we get into some of the rest of what we're going to discuss, which is a little bit of nuts and bolts and sort of how we rolled out the content and what kind of impact we've kind of seen this having. So the first thing is our meeting structures. We've had 3 meetings. We had 3 meetings last year. We have 3 meetings planned this year. We feel it's really important for those to be in person, full day, really kind of committed time so that we can present some content in the, it's kind of a model of presenting some content, having some team time, presenting content, having team time, which our participants have found really valuable. This year and starting year 2, again, we had others, you know, we had new LEAs that wanted to join, and then we had new team members even that wanted to join, and we wanted them to hit the ground running. So we added a boot camp where we try to bring them sort of up to speed on what was discussed, where their districts got to if they were joining a team the year before. And we found that routine communication in between sessions, reaching out, sharing resources, was really important. We're layering in some coaching this year in between sessions, which has been very well received, and we're going to, you know, really look at continuing that in the years to come. In terms of content, what I'll say without getting into all the details of what we shared is that what we found really important was having this framework to anchor the content to. So you know, inclusion can get very big and overwhelming. So using the index for inclusion, which is the triangle with the policy, practice, and culture there, to anchor our days last year was really, really helpful for people to understand what we were talking about. And then the other piece, you'll see that the results pyramid there that Kevin and Janelle just shared. So having our activities being grounded in a framework, we found really, really helpful. And then again, moving forward to this year, we're looking at UDL, that equity-based whole system transformation. We've had one meeting. Our next meeting is coming up in just a couple of weeks. And so the other piece that we just want to share is kind of what our outcomes are. What are we seeing in terms of participation and impact? So what we have at this point, we have 14 of our districts and charters that are engaged. Again, added some this year, and all of those who participated the year before are continuing with us this year. That boot camp was very popular, as you'll see. And then again, with the coaching in between. And that coaching is happening both through our county office, but also through SIP and open access and the work that they are also working on with teams, whether it's through SIM or other means there. And then in terms of impact, again, you know, participants were really focused on UDL. They kind of got to this place of like, we really need to dig into this and know what this is and figure out how this is going to work in terms of implementing it at our districts and our sites. So we responded to that and you know, made that our focus for this year. Anecdotally, what we're seeing is just an increase in co-teaching across districts in our county. We're seeing this addition of universal access or WIN time to meet the needs of students, sort of moving their way into kind of having an opportunity to support all students in that way. And then just this real appetite for collaboration and alignment of initiatives. So we also do a lot of differentiated assistance work and SIM work, and our partners at SELPA do a lot of the SIM work. And so how we sort of braid those together is really our next section, an endeavor that we took on with one of our district partners. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Dana from our Orchid School District.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services in Orchid, and I'm happy to talk this afternoon about how we have worked with our friends at the County Education Office to leverage required processes in an innovative, relevant way that is moving the ball forward for inclusive practices. And so let me start with some background. We're a relatively small rural district, around 4,900 students. We've had successes with inclusive practices in the past. I can testify to them myself because my wife and I have a son with autism who went through our school system, and we feel had a good experience and made good progress. And by the way, my son ended up at the Wayfinders program in Fresno State. 3 cheers for the Bulldogs in Fresno. All of this being said, we feel that our successes in Orchid have been more bright spots, more singular than systemic. And then meanwhile, our district has qualified for some state processes. The first is differentiated assistance due to gaps between district-wide performance and the performance of our students with disabilities. We also have been in the midst of the compliance and improvement monitoring SIM process. And then along with all that, like other districts, we've been dealing with a proliferation of severe student behaviors, many by students with disabilities. And this trend has sparked concerns among staff, parents, other students, et al. Then this also is a moment of opportunity for our school district, in that we have been working with Kevin Schaefer and SIP, and really appreciated our engagement with them. And then we also have a new director of our special education department this year, and she's prioritized implementation of co-teaching at our secondary sites. So that's some background. That's the opportunity that we have. What's our solution? Why not merge these processes and our implementation of inclusive practices into one comprehensive improvement effort? And we've done that with our friends at the Santa Barbara County Ed Office. And I'd like to talk about that effort in a little more detail. It's a multi-pronged initiative. What we have done is we've identified a junior high school in our district and 2 feeder elementary schools as kind of a case study, if you will. And our friends with SBCEO came to our campuses, and they have done surveys, empathy interviews with staff, focus groups with students and parents. And all this has been an effort to get perspectives and insights on what we're doing right for students with disabilities and what we can improve. And along with that, we also have had a team from each of these schools participate in the countywide inclusion network that Rachel described. And then we're continuing to work with Kevin and SIP. So what's the promise of all this? What we think what we're getting out of this is a more solid data-based understanding of what we're doing, that we can build on, that what's going well, what we can build on in the future. We're also getting a more solid database understanding of what we're doing that we can fine tune, level up, or just flat out change. We also think that all of this is going to lead to a more systemic, standardized implementation of inclusive practices at all of our sites. And then also we think it's going to lead to more synergy between general education and special education team members. This is all hard work. We're not there yet. We may never get there, if you will, but we think that this work that we're doing now with SBCEO is going to kickstart a process of continuous improvement in what we're doing for students with disabilities and in the outcomes we're getting from that subgroup. We also think that this process is more relevant and meaningful for us than what we've done for differentiated assistance and SIM in the past, because folks are being heard. We're reaching out, getting input, and getting some perspectives we haven't heard before. So big thanks to our friends from SBCEO for their help with this. Big thanks to the county SELPA and Ray Avila, he's been involved. And of course, big thanks to SIP and Kevin Schaefer. Now I'm going to segue to Sean Carey of the County Education Office to continue.
Thanks so much, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. My name is Sean Carey. I'm in the same role as Rachel Favre at the Santa Barbara County Education Office as a Director of School and District Support. And of course, one of our roles, as has been mentioned, is to support LEAs who are eligible for differentiated assistance. And so Joe already reviewed this, but just to reinforce our really keen desire to not be redundant with what we knew were really important and robust efforts that were already underway in ORCID with SIP and with SELPA and through the Inclusion Network, and to enhance and not compete with any of those efforts. So you see on the prior slide that our goal was to come in and we discern through collaborative conversations with Kevin at the table and Joe and Rachel and myself and Ray that a great role for Santa Barbara County Education Office to have would be to kind of help make sure we had a comprehensive view of the perspective of staff, students, and families when it comes to how inclusion was being experienced in their various school sites. So we did conduct inquiry at both, thank you. There we go. At 3 school sites. And actually, I'm going to start at the bottom of that gray screenshot because that is today, part of our data collection. This slide is about how we collected our data, and that included a district level needs assessment. And so just, earlier this afternoon, even we met with district leaders around and kind of assessed against SIP's inclusion blueprint for inclusion, the status of the efforts around inclusive practices in ORCID. But our more intensive efforts happened mostly in October, November, as you can see there, at 3 school sites where we were wanting to make sure that we were working with 3 sites, we were working with 3 audiences at each site, and we wanted to make sure there were both commonalities and some differentiation for the audiences with whom we were engaging. So one commonality is that we designed a survey. The survey questions asked about the same 4 elements that were really important to us, both in terms of what we were collecting and what we would ultimately be reporting out on. And then some of the variability happened in terms of how we collected more of the qualitative data. We did grab some open-ended inputs from the survey instruments themselves, but also we conducted empathy interviews with staff and then focus group interviews with small groups of students and with parents. So I'll show you on the next slide here. You can see the numbers of the kinds of surveys we got back, all told from the 3 sites, and the number of interviews conducted. On the next slide, you're able to see what those 4 elements were. You can see there it was around rightful presence, vision, systems and structures, and instructional practice. So we had questions in the survey and in our interviews around each of those elements, posed to all 3 educational partner groups. This graph here that you're seeing is just pulled from the report that we generated for the district. And you can see a screenshot of the district report there, the title page. But in addition to the district report that synthesized inputs from all the sites, each site got their own site-specific report that featured both the quantitative data that you're seeing here for each domain, and then also some qualitative data. We included in the report's summary data. Here's a little look at what some of the qualitative data presented as for those reading the reports. This is all the different sites kind of, I've anonymized these. We've anonymized these to make sure you can't identify the school site, but you'll get a sense just from scanning this about the kinds of themes that emerged for staff. All 3 of these excerpts are coming from the instructional practices element or domain. So here's what staff are saying about that at one of the schools. We would summarize some themes we gathered from the qualitative inputs and often include pulled quotes. And the next slide will just show you a sample from students. Same way, themes emerging and a pulled quote or 2. And same thing for families. What I'll say here is what we did not include, and it was really intentional in the reports, is we did not include recommendations for next steps. That was really important for us to allow ORCID staff and leaders, ideally with our involvement and participation, so that we can learn and support, and also potentially in conjunction with the countywide inclusion network to discern what those best next steps are. So we're so grateful that we've been able to have this close working partnership with SELPA, with SIP, and of course, first and foremost with ORCID as they endeavor to implement more and more inclusive practices over time. We've been able to learn and connect with them regularly. And for a couple comments about those possible next steps, I'm going to kick it back to Joe.
Yeah, we're still processing the information from this data collection. We loved the quotes that Sean and Rachel and others selected to highlight. In terms of takeaways, what we're seeing is validation for the culture and relationships at our school sites. Students, including students with disabilities, do feel cared about and included. They feel comfortable. We also feel that our staff are committed to inclusive practices. But what we're also seeing is there's just a wide variation in how people define inclusion and inclusive practices and what their vision of what it needs to look like is. And so we feel like we've got to do some work on definitions, vision, terminology, the language we use, and what we're looking at doing in the coming weeks is a roadshow where we hit the sites in our school district and kind of update folks on where we are, what we're pursuing, and invite folks to think about their own role at their school and how it relates to our vision for inclusion and inclusive practices. They can fill that in, not us. They can noodle on that. We also are looking at doing a little more in terms of a specific timeline for inclusive practices, inclusion, UDL, and basically figuring out where we want to take this in the years to come. So those are our next steps. This whole thing has been very meaningful for us.
Excellent. Oh, go ahead,
No,
Kevin.
I just wanted to say thank you for the history and the process. organizationally, from the county to the SELPA to the district. And the thing that I want to stress is that from the beginning, there's been a sense of humility that we talked about earlier. In being the experts, sometimes we forget to ask those that are closest to the innovations that we're trying to implement. And really out of the gate, there was this sense of, we don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. So we have to go to the students and the families and the teachers to ask the question, to get a really clear picture of the practices and the policies that we've put in place that we think are effective, but we don't know for sure until we ask and we elicit that feedback. So, thank you and kudos to, the Santa Barbara County Education Office, the SELPA, and of course to the ORCA team who is just leaning into this work. And I think the other thing, along with the humility, is this idea of being vulnerable and really putting on the table all of the strengths and the beautiful things that are happening in ORCUT, and also looking at what are the gaps that we need to fill. And that takes that sense of vulnerability and humility that is just so evident in the work that is created from the county to the SELPA, to the district, and the sites and the classrooms that actually reach students and families. So thank you so much, for being here and being willing to share your story with the rest of California. So Janelle, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and agreed, ditto to everything Kevin said, but Santa Barbara and ORCA, having you here to share your experiences is so helpful to hear that, we have to start somewhere. And that's a lot of times where people ask is, where do we get started? We can't tell you where to start, but start. Just get started. And even if you don't have it just right, I think that's the message that I'm taking away. You started with inquiry. That's a great place to start. So I think we have enough time for maybe one or two questions. So I'm going to open up the chat and invite folks to, if you have any specific questions that we might be able to answer, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and we'll give you a minute to do that now.
A lot of thank yous. We answered a couple questions in the Q&A in between presenting. I don't know that we got to all of them.
There is a question in the Q&A about service delivery of SAI and when and how to deliver SAI during core content areas. And so I was going to type up an answer, but it's really hard for us to answer that generally because it is an IEP team decision on how those services are going to be provided to a student based on their needs. So we do invite you, though, to come to future sessions so you can learn about the various instructional models, collaboration models that may be leveraged within an inclusive environment to best support students using that SAI either in the general education classroom or even in addition to in the general education classroom and outside the general education classroom for specific remedial support. So we'd invite you to come to future sessions to, unpack that further. I don't see any questions. Kevin, did you see any come in the chat?
I did not. I've been following.
Well, then with that, we would like to invite you in the next 2 minutes to complete our survey from today's session. That we are always looking for ways to improve the work that we're doing and our webinars. So please provide us with some feedback. And then while you're completing the survey, we're going to do a little shameless plug for our SIP Inclusion Conference that we are hosting. We can't believe we are in our 4th year, and it is May 8th and 9th this year. Again, it's no cost, virtual. Our focus this year is Pump It Up, Elevating Voices and Belonging for our virtual conference. So you can use that QR code to register. We're also dropping the link in the chat. So complete that survey. Don't forget to register for conference, and we will see you next week, January 29th, same time, same place, 3:30 to 5 o'clock. And we will focus on master scheduling to elevate educator collaboration and inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities. We have more guest presenters who will talk about their experiences across multiple grade bands from early education all the way through high school. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from more folks who are doing the work in the field. And again, you'll get to kind of pick your own journey. So if you want to learn more about early ed, you can learn more about early ed. But if you're high school, go learn about high school, middle school, or elementary. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Santa Barbara and Orcutt, for helping us kick off such a wonderful session 1, and have a great evening, everyone.